Hey everyone, we're back for Bo at Ballard Creek, Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Bo Comes to Ballard Creek. Evening was Bo's favorite time of day, when Jack and Arvid were resting and the day's work was done. This evening, Bo was sitting at a long table with Arvid and Jack, cutting pictures out of old Montgomery Ward catalogs. Hank Redmond was there too. Hank was the new marshal. He had come to the cook shack after supper to pass some time with Jack and Arvid. He probably hoped Jack would have cake left over from supper, too. He was staying at the Roadhouse, and Milo and the Roadhouse man wasn't famous for his cake. Bo had heard all of the grown-ups talking about how they liked the new marshal. Mostly, it was because he didn't pay any attention to the stills. People around Ballard Creek made whiskey with stills since it was against the law to buy it. Only trouble with making your own whiskey was that it took a lot of sugar, and sugar was expensive. Sometimes, if it had been a long time before the scow came with groceries, there wasn't any sugar to be had at Milo's store. Bo knew making whiskey was kind of bothersome because grown-ups at Ballard Creek had a lot to say about it. Hank Redmond didn't seem to know there were such things as stills, and sometimes he'd even have a glass of whiskey. Since nothing against the law ever happened in Ballard Creek except making whiskey, Arvid and Hank had a pretty easy job. While they talked, Bo cut out the tables and chairs and things from the furniture part of the catalog. Then she carefully pasted and cut out furniture on the inside of the shoebox Jack had given her. That would be the house for her catalog people. She would cut out the people last because they were the hardest, and sometimes the scissors wouldn't behave, and her people ended up without hands or feet. Maybe Jack would cut them out for her. The paste jar had a little brush inside attached to the lid, which she thought was a very good idea. When no one was looking, she'd get some paste on her finger and lick it off. It had a very interesting taste. It tasted white. New people like Hank didn't know everything about everybody the way the people of Ballard Creek and the mining camp did. New people were always curious about Bo, which used to make her feel cross. Just imagine, explained Jack. Imagine someone seeing you for the first time with us two great big men, one red-faced Swede and this other one big and black. Got to stir up their curiosity. It would for me. Hank was no different. He was curious too. When they'd stopped talking about Woodrow Wilson or Gene Turney the boxer, Hank nodded his head at Bo. "Tell me how you come to have this little one," he said. Bo looked up at Hank. "My mama walked away like a turtle." Arvid laughed. "It's a long story." "Good," said Hank. "Well, I can tell you the short version or the long version," said Arvid. Bo said, "Tell it all the way through." Jack laughed and pinched her cheeks. "Bo likes to hear us tell this, because she's the star of the story." "Long is good," said Hank. Arvid went to the stove and picked up the coffee pot. "Anyone else?" Jack and Hank shook their heads, so Arvid poured the last of the coffee into his own cup. It was very thick and black. Arvid looked into the cup and said, "Maybe not," and put his cup down. "Tell him," said Bo. Arvid sat down at the table again. "Well, we was at Rampart, me and Jack. 1924, that was. Kovich had just gone bust. You ever meet Kovich?" Hank shook his head. "Anyway," said Arvid, "after Kovich went belly up, I wired up the boss here at Ballard Creek to see if he had work. He did. He sent me back a wire. Wanted, blacksmith, bad. Asked if any other men wanted work. Needed a cook, too, he said. I told the boys the next day when we was having breakfast. But they were all going upriver or someplace else where the mine wasn't closed. but Jack, he said, he'd like to do that cooking job. So he wired the boss at Ballard here, and he got a job too. So me and Jack, we'd be leaving Rampart on the next boat going down river. Now, this one day, I'd just come off shift and went down to the riverbank to watch all the goings-on around the steamboat that just came in. The steamer Clarice it was. The deckhands were loading wood. They made a long line, throwing logs from one to another, like they do, and it was a better show than watching them drop a log and get all tangled up. I laughed so hard when that happened I nearly choked. So there I was, leaning against the woodpile, down at the riverbank, just watching all the hoorah. Glad it wasn't up to me who had to get on that boat, go up river, and quit the country. I rolled me a cigarette and was enjoying it, first one of the day, watching Millie. Millie was one of the girls from town. She'd had a baby just a few weeks before. There she was with a bundle of a baby, getting all her stuff put on board the Clarice, hollering at the boys who were carrying her bags. A real witch, which is why everyone called her Mean Millie. When she was finished yelling, she just walked up to me where I was standing by the woodpile, minding my own business, and pushed this baby at me. Take this kid to Nalto. Here's the picture. Take this kid to Nalto on your way to the Koyukuk, she said. The orphanage there. I'm not going to be stuck with this baby forever. Well, I just dropped my cigarette and took the baby. Never even thought to say no, because I didn't like Mean Millie and didn't think no baby should be stuck with her either. Arvid, said Millie, sailed across the gangplank into the boat and didn't look back. The boat edged out onto the current and was on its way up the Yukon before Arvid really thought about what he'd done. Then Jack told his part. He'd been taking out the slop bucket when he first saw her. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the Swede with that baby looking up river at the boat going away, and I knew right off that it was Mean Millie's baby. Only baby in camp. Got you a baby, I says to him. I do, says Arvid. What are you going to do with it, I says. Darned if I know, he said. So I took hold of her fast because I didn't like the way her head was bobbing around. Easy to see the Swede knew nothing about babies. Well, bring her in the cook shack, I told him, and we'll study about it. Bo had stopped pasting furniture so she could listen very hard. And what did you do then? Bo asked, hugging her elbows and hunching her shoulders with excitement, as if she didn't know what was coming. Well, I knew a lot about babies. Lots of babies in our kitchen when I was growing up down south. The first thing I thought of was a bottle. Millie got to have left you a bottle, I said. Maybe she was a nursing baby the natural way, but it didn't seem likely. No, said Arvid. Didn't leave me nothing. Well, what's its name, I asked. She never said. Boy or girl, I asked. He just looks at me and pulls his shoulders up. Don't know. So I got out some old flour sacks from the top shelf and some safety pins from the sewing box. I tell Arvid, first off, we got to change its pants. That's first. So I show him how to fold a flour sack small enough so a baby's legs won't stick straight out the sides like a frog. And then I take off that old saggy wet diaper, which is all her mama had left her, and we look at each other. A girl, we say, and we smile. Well, we'll call her Bo, I said. Bo, says Arvid. Bo, I said. Why'd you pick Bo? Asked Bo, like she always did. It was just a name sent to me, popped right into my head, which was what Jack always said. I told the Swede, I said, don't want to give her a real name. Let them do that at the orphanage. Give her a real name and we might get attached to her. Like you don't want to give away a stray dog once you name it, you know? Hank lit his pipe and threw the match into the ashtray. He'd already figured out that Jack wouldn't take kindly if he threw anything on the floor. I wouldn't have called her Bo, he said. but Jack ignored that. Arvid went out to look in Millie's cabin for a bottle, and sure enough, he found one. He washed it up, and already we had a bottle and plenty of milk in the cook shack and plenty of flour sacks for diapers. She can sleep here in the tomato sauce box, and you can take the night shift, I says to Arvid, and I'll do the day. Night shift, he says. Babies don't sleep all the time, I says. When they're awake, someone has to feed them and change them. That's the night shift for you, and I'll do the day. I can't take her to the bunkhouse, says Arvid. The boys will have my hide. We'll put a cot out for you right here. No trouble, I tell him. Jack winks at Hank. I knew he'd have plenty of trouble sleeping in that little short cot, but I didn't want to discourage him. Jack leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together behind his head, smiling. Bo could see he liked the story as much as she did. Next day, Arvid was going to make her some clothes, Jack said. Some little long shift things on his sewing machine, but the material he had was all striped twill that he used for work shirts, too rough for a baby. So he made some little shifts out of our undershirts, nice and soft. We figured she'd need a lot more clothes than that, so he told the boys he'd give $1 to anyone who would give him their undershirts so he could make her some other things. But the boys wouldn't take any money for the undershirts because they were all tickled about her, glad to see her being cared for. Didn't even call us 7 kinds of a fool like we figured they would. They even started a collection at the saloon and brought us a bag of nuggets for her and wrote Bo on the bag in fancy letters. That's her steak, Kovich said. And tell him about how you kept me, Bo said. That was her favorite part. We went past the Ruby camp. Used to be a big camp, but it was winding down by the time Bo was born. Past the Galena lead mines, all closed down. Little town there, that's all. Past the wood camps, and then a few hours before we got to Nalto, she looked at us and smiled. First time ever. This little crooked smile, just one-sided, funny, and we laughed so hard. Just like a real person, Arvid said, like he'd never seen a baby smile before. Then we got off at Nalto, and we walked a little way up to the Catholic church where the orphanage was. We saw one of them nuns outside of the church, and no one else. Just her in a long black robe they wear, with a white cap thing. And she looked mean as Mean Millie. We looked at her, and we just kept on walking to where we was going to catch the sow. We didn't say nothing, and then Arvid says, I think I'd like to call her Marta after my mother. I say, that's a fine name. And that was it. We never talked about it. Never discussed nothing. We just made up our minds that we wasn't giving her to no one. Well, said Hank. He looked at Bo, who shook his head in a wondering sort of way. If that don't beat all. Bo nodded with satisfaction. Now tell him what everyone did when we got here, she said. That was her favorite part, too. Well, said Jack, you never saw nothing like it. You'd have thought we brought a princess up the Koyukuk. Everybody, the whole town was crazy about babies, which were a few and far between. Eskimos were just foolish over babies. Then half the town is old bachelor miners. Never had any babies of their own. They spoiled the Eskimo babies something awful, and here we come with a brand new baby. Everyone in Ballard Creek hustled on down to the riverbank, where the bargemen yelled, Yoo-hoo, like they always do, and we were on the first scow of the season, so the whole town was excited. Stopped work at the diggings even, to see who's coming and see what they brought. Kids most likely looking for candy. Always some candy here on the first scow.